It is good to be part of this program today. I wish I were with you, but I'm in West Africa working to try to bring another dictator to justice as this meeting convenes. You know, it was 11 years ago today when Syrians dared to hope, dared to dream that they could have a country like other countries, a country like the United States, where the government serves the interests of the people and not the interests of a dictator and his family. We know how that government responded. It was a message, it was a dream, it was a hope that Assad could not allow. His response was to, frankly, wage war against the people of his country, disappear into dungeons of torture and death, perhaps as many as a 250,000, with tens of thousands of those murdered and others surviving, broken and traumatized, and sadly today I think thousands others suffering even as we meet here today. The good news, and it's rare to find any good news in the Syrian context, is that we're beginning to see justice, and it's a reflection of the work of the Syrian people. It's a reflection of the evidence of Caesar, the brave Syrian military policeman whose job it was, under judicial police orders, was to take photos of people tortured to death by the regime. And over the course of 20 months, rather than leave Syria, he bravely, and at great risk to himself and his family, stayed there and smuggled those photos out, so that we today have some of the strongest evidence that the world has ever seen, stronger even than we have of Nuremberg, of the crimes committed by a regime against its own people. We've had all the efforts of civil society organizations and the partnerships with organizations around the world. I'm proud to represent the U.S. Holocaust Museum that supported me as a fellow in their Center for the Prevention of Genocide since I left the State Department 7 years ago, 6.5 years ago. But there are other organizations as well that have partnered with Syrians in bringing millions of pages of documents out of the country and providing this breakthrough that we've recently seen in German courts, the conviction in Koblenz of a Syrian chief of interrogation at a particularly nasty detention facility, out of which thousands of persons in the end were murdered, hundreds of which are depicted in the Caesar photos. Anwar Raslan was brought to trial based upon the evidence of Syrians, the evidence of Caesar, and recently was convicted and sentenced to life in prison for the murder of 27 individuals and complicity in the torture of thousands of others. It's a first step for justice, and an extremely important one, because it's not just about Raslan. It also is a finding that the Syrian regime itself is guilty of mass crimes, because in order for it to be an international crime, those acts of violence, those acts of torture, needed to be committed as part of a government plan or policy to conduct a widespread or systematic attack against its own population. The German court found that, and the implication of it is that that means that anyone that now continues to support those forces and to support that plan and to allow those who managed and conducted those horrible crimes, allows them to enrich themselves from that, can themselves be held responsible for these crimes. I think particularly of Assad's dream that he can somehow normalize his relations with the international community. I mean, Bahrain has sent him an ambassador. The UAE is engaged in diplomatic relations, and he's dreamed that he could be readmitted to the Arab League and someday go to the United Nations and could receive Western bank support or development aid or corporate investment to rebuild Syria, but it would be rebuilding on the property of people who'd been tortured to death. And anyone doing that would become complicit frankly, the war crime of pillage. And so the message of justice, I think, is extremely significant for all of us, and it I think shows the importance of these cases in Germany, in other countries in Europe, and we hope soon in the United States of America. They send a clear message that there can be no normalization with this dictator. He can't reward or rebuild his country based upon the crimes that he's committed against his own citizens. This is, of course, not just about Syria. It's about the whole world. He got away with these crimes: the mass torture, the use of chemical weapons, the bombardment of hospitals, the driving off of half the people of his country, with, in the last several years, substantial Russian support. He got away with them because he had Russia vetoing resolutions in the UN General Assembly. And now we see that Russian regime, headed by Vladimir Putin, committing some of the very same crimes in Ukraine because Assad got away with it. Can Putin get away with it? If these norms against the commission of crimes against humanity, against the intentional taking of innocent life to maintain wealth and power and privilege, which is what's happened in Syria, if that can happen there, it can happen anywhere. So it's very good to be joining this program, but I want you all to take away from it the message that these efforts at documentation, these efforts at judgment, these efforts at bringing cases in national courts are critical, not just to the future of Syria, of which we all care so much, but also to all our futures and the futures of our families to live safely and securely in our own homes and in our own countries. Thank you very much.